How I use AI at askleo. Hi there, everyone. Leo Notenboom here for askleo.com. Very much not an AI, but I do use AI. Now, you may have noticed that there's a small update at the top of every page on the site. Right above the search box on the right-hand side, it now says written by a real human. That links to actually the article that is associated with the video that I'm recording. That real human, of course, would be me. I suspect that in the future, especially, this is going to set me apart from waves of AI generated content. But like I said, that doesn't mean that I avoid AI completely. I want to share how AI helps me and how it sometimes misses the mark. Now, since AI is changing so quickly, I'm updating this article a little sooner than most. The original version of this article I created only 2 years ago. A lot has changed. To be clear, I write every article on Ask Leo. I don't accept guest posts or sponsored posts or anything similar. In some ways, that actually does limit the reach of the site, but it's one of the ways that I've chosen to set myself apart from other sites. Now, of course, I use a variety of tools to help me, and AI is just one of those tools. I also have a fantastic human editor who continues to make me look like a better writer than I am. AI is incredibly powerful, sometimes unreliable, and as I said, it's in constant flux. But it's also something that I'm honestly having a lot of fun with. So what I want to do is I want to describe some of the AI processes that I use for a specific article, which I'll show you here in a second. Note that since the article is finished, some of the AI responses that I'm going to show you here might actually differ from what ends up getting published. Such is the nature of AI. It actually includes a certain amount of randomness in its responses. These days, I use mostly Claude with Google's Gemini Nano Banana Pro for images. Now, of course, that could change over time. I use these tools for three distinct tasks: ideation, summarization, and then image generation. Let me show you what I mean. So what you're looking at on the screen right now is very much behind the scenes. This is what it looks like when I'm working on Ask Leo articles. The article that I'm working on or showing you right now is an article, How Do I Clear Cookies for Just One Site? It should have published probably a few days before the article and video that you're watching right now will have published. So even though I know the answer for this, it's actually sometimes very, very interesting to just throw the question, the original question, at AI to see what it comes up with. So that's what I'm going to do. Now, the original question, in this case, it's the title of the article, but the original question often can be different than the title I end up using. It can be paragraphs of information. I'll take all of that original stuff and throw it into AI. In this case, the title is the question. Like I said, the AI that I'm using is Claude, and we'll just sort of see what Claude does for me. Now you can see that it has come up with a very nice visual of exactly how things would happen for different browsers that we care about. Chrome and Edge both being based on Chromium, and of course Firefox and Safari being based on their own technologies. There is a fairly lengthy description here, but what's interesting about this is that it's not a bad answer. It's actually a really good answer, and it's probably an answer that, in absence of anything else, I wouldn't really feel bad about somebody asking Claude this question, looking at this answer, and walking away with actually a pretty reasonable answer to the question. When I do this, the reason I throw the question into an AI, specifically a question for which I already know the answer, is that, I don't know everything. It's not uncommon for an AI answer to the same question that I'm working on to actually have a couple of things that I've missed, a couple of things that I hadn't thought about, or perhaps even a different way of approaching the topic. For example, this visual that AI has created at the top is actually not an unreasonable approach to visually displaying at least the beginning or the direction of an answer that I might provide. You can see right away that there's some commonality across the three major browsers on the PC. You start with the lock icon, and there's cookies and site data information, and there's things you then act on based on what it is you want to do. So that's great. I'm not going to use the visual, but I've got my article, like I said, already written, so we'll go ahead and go back to that. But that's one thing that I do is I will take the question, run it through AI, and see if it comes up with something that I hadn't already thought about. All right, I've written the article. In fact, you can see here as we scroll through, there's a fair amount of text associated with the article, along with images and the usual how-to kind of things that I provide for these kinds of topics. What I generally do with an article that I've written is I will use AI to give me a draft of the summary to the article and what's called the excerpt. So first off, we start by copy pasting the entire article right up to my suggestion that you subscribe. We copy that into the clipboard and we go back over to Claude. The way I ask it is this: I paste in the text of the article. I then go back to the top just because of the way that this happened. And then I ask it to summarize in 50 words or fewer in a style that's similar to the article, using a 6th grade vocabulary and in the second person. In other words, give me a short summary of the article. And it does. So that's a pretty reasonable summary of what's going on. I never take the summary verbatim. The reason for that is simply that it's not really me. It's not in my writing style. But the approach that I use is if this initial summary feels close, as this one kind of does, then I would copy and paste it into the article's summary and then edit the heck out of it. If you take a look at the article on which this particular video is based, askleo.com/168449, you'll see examples of real actual changes that I've made to a summary that was provided by Claude on a different article. But you can get a sense for exactly how my writing changes, the kinds of transformations that I make based on my writing style versus what the AI gives me. Like I said, it's not bad, but it's not me. So that transformation is something that I do to the summary. So if we go back to the article, you can see that there is a summary box here. I already did this for the article. There's a summary at the top of the article that I ran through this exact same process with. And you can see that this summary is something that I did this exact same process on. I asked AI for a summary, I copy pasted what it gave me, and then I tweaked it to be my summary, not AI's summary. Now, I do the same with what's called the excerpt. Now, in the editing interface that I use, this is WordPress, by the way, there's a separate box down here for the excerpt. And you can see that there's a pretty reasonable excerpt here because I did go through this same process. What's interesting is that since I'm in a conversation with Claude, I actually don't need to repaste the article. Claude already knows what the article I'm talking about is because it's been presented earlier in the conversation. That's actually kind of powerful because it is a conversation. The excerpt is what I call a tease. It's essentially marketing, if you will. It's a paragraph that's designed to encourage you or have you question what it is this article is about and hopefully present it in such an interesting way that you will click through or scroll down or actually read the article. And you can see that's what this has given you. Now, there are changes once again that I end up making to this, and the article that I mentioned, the written article associated with this video, has a more concrete step-by-step transformation on an AI suggested excerpt versus the excerpt that I actually use. But like I said, there are changes that I would make to this, just as one off the top of my head kind of a change. Here's how to fix the one giving you grief. I would probably say something more along the lines of, let me show you how to fix a site that's giving you a problem. Same idea, different words, my style. So we've got our summary, we've got our excerpt. Now it's time to think about images. All of the articles on Ask Leo have at the top some kind of, I think the technical term is a hero image for some reason, but it's an image that somehow encapsulates or represents what the article is about, hopefully in an entertaining or an engaging way. I'm not particularly creative, at least not when it comes to images and illustrations, so I've been using AI to help me out there. There are two ways I generally have AI help me. I'll ask it to just create me an image for the article and see what it comes up with, if it's an AI that can generate images. However, more commonly these days, I actually ask it to describe some things for me. So what I'm going to ask Claude this time is to describe 5 engaging hero images for this article. Like I said, just describe. Claude doesn't do images. I'll show you what we'll do with the result in a minute. But it's going to, again, given the article that it's already chewed up, it's already earlier in the conversation, it's going to do that. 5 ideas for images that might be appropriate for this article. See a cartoon browser in a window with a tiny broom, sweeping cookies. That's kind of cute. A close-up of a chocolate chip cookies with a no symbol over it. Honestly, I kind of think that the chocolate chip cookie, at least as the primary focus of an image, has probably been overused when it comes to cookies. A split screen, a giant padlock, mechanics toolbox. You get the idea. These are good-ish ideas for images that could technically represent what this article is about. So I'm just going to pick one. I'll pick the first one since it actually made me smile. Copy that to the clipboard. And now we go over to the tool that I use for images, which is Google's Gemini. What I'm going to do, I'll ask it to create an image. Please create a 16 by 9. What I'm asking for there is the aspect ratio so that it's a rectangular image, horizontal, in what we would normally consider to be HD aspect ratio. Image in Pixar style. That's a style that I've adopted for most of the images that I create on Ask Leo. I never want to be accused of trying to create a fake realistic image. I just go directly to the Pixar style because it's clear, it's bright, it's entertaining, it's engaging. Pixar style image of, and paste. Friendly cartoon browser window, yada, yada, yada. There's the request, and we'll make it go. And it's creating my image. Now, the amount of time it takes actually varies. I've been finding that Gemini has been getting pretty quick lately. It's not as slow as it used to be. It used to be quite one of those situations where you would fire it off like this, go away for a cup of coffee, and then come back. And there's an image of a very happy browser sweeping up, again, chocolate chip cookies, because apparently that's the metaphor that we're all using. Now, the actual image that I used for the real article you saw here is not similar to what we just had AI generate for us. That's because in this particular case, I actually had an idea of my own. What I ended up asking AI to do for me was to create that 16 by 9 image in Pixar style of a computer screen displaying something related to cookies, in this case, web page error, cookies corrupt, and a corgi running off with a couple of cookies in his mouth. I've been incorporating corgis into more of the images, again, more as just sort of a lighthearted way to continue to gain interest. So if there's some way that I can factor a corgi into the thing, I will. In this case, it's a very blatant dog up front. In other cases, I've had other images created where, okay, yeah, there's a corgi sleeping in the back. But the bottom line here is that, especially using Pixar style, this then becomes a fairly engaging and interesting image, and that's the image that I ended up using for the actual article. One thing that's worth noting about this image is that you'll notice that there was a fairly reasonable detailed prompt describing the image. Well, it's perfect for things like screen readers. So if I go back to the image here in WordPress where I'm changing it, if I edit that image, you'll notice that the alternative text, which is what screen reading software often uses to describe the images to people with visual issues, it's the request that I put in to Google's Nano Banana, just the text of the description of the image that I asked for. When I pasted this here, I noticed that there was actually a typo in the description. I had one too many R's in error. You know, originally I thought, oh, great, AI couldn't spell again. But no, it was my fault, because if you actually take a look at the screen that was generated by AI, sure enough, that typo persists. I just decided to leave it in there as, yeah, it's a web page error. Now, to be clear, there are a couple of other things that I do to images that also end up using AI, although not quite as dramatically. The image that I created was in 16 by 9, which is, like I said, HDTV is 16 by 9. What I prefer is 2400 by 1260, whatever ratio that turns out to be. That's apparently the ideal aspect ratio for photos from articles that are shared on social media sites like Facebook. So if you share a link to this article, this image is what appears, and it appears in its fullest. There are two ways to do that. I can crop the image, which basically takes a slice off the top and the bottom, or in tools like Photoshop or Canva, I can use what's called generative fill. So I can actually tell it to fill in a couple of edges on the right and the left to match whatever the image is. Photoshop's been just nailing this lately. It's doing a wonderful job. The other thing I do is I use some kind of an AI or smart eraser to erase the little star that Google's Gemini puts in the lower right-hand corner of every image as its branding. Since I'm giving attribution to Gemini as the source of the image, I don't want that star in there. So it gets removed and removed in such a smart way that you can never really tell it wasn't there. My takeaway for you is simply this. Don't discount AI. While I agree there are many controversial aspects of how it's generated, how it's used, all that kind of stuff, it's turning out to be a very, very valuable tool to many people, including myself. For updates, for comments, for links related to this topic and more, visit the article askleo.com/168449. It will go through this same process, although it uses a different article as its example, and especially for the text transformations from AI to, say, my summary, it actually gives you a breakdown point by point of which phrases I changed and why, what it was required to make it sound more like Leo and less like AI. I'm Leo Notenboom, still not an AI. Thanks for watching.